Marcus Price was 40 years old when he found the contract on the home printer on a Wednesday afternoon. He had come back from a site visit 2 hours early. The document was in the output tray, 41 pages, face down. He picked it up. He read the first page standing at the printer and understood, before he reached the second, exactly what he was looking at. He read all 41 pages. He made a copy on the machine in his home office. He put the original back in the tray, face down, the way it had been. He went to the kitchen, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table and looked at nothing in particular for a long time. When Rachel came home at 6:30, he said the site visit had gone well and asked what she wanted for dinner. He did not mention the contract. He did not mention the contract for 3 weeks. What he built in those 3 weeks is the only reason the story ended the way it did. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The printer sat on the credenza in the alcove between the kitchen and the back hallway, a machine nobody in the house used much anymore except Rachel, who had kept a habit of printing things she needed to read carefully rather than reading them on screens. Marcus had always understood that habit. He had the same one. He printed contracts. He read them on paper, with a pencil, at the kitchen table. He had been doing this since before he owned anything worth contracting over. It was simply how he worked. He had grown up in High Point, North Carolina, the son of a man who ran a small metal fabrication shop for 31 years and a mother who worked school transportation dispatch with a precision for logistics that had raised 3 children on a schedule that never slipped. They were people who understood that a thing either ran correctly or it didn't, and that the difference between the two was almost always something that could be traced to a decision made earlier, when the stakes were lower and the correction was still possible. Marcus had learned to run a milling machine at 17, working weekends in his father's shop. He had taken that skill to a precision components manufacturer in Greensboro at 22, and had worked his way across every function of the operation: floor, quality, scheduling, procurement, customer service, over the following 13 years. At 35, when the founder announced plans to close rather than sell, Marcus had arranged financing, bought the operation, renamed it Apex Industrial Components, and spent the next 5 years turning it into a company with 67 employees, $14 million in annual revenue, and an EBITDA that made it worth considerably more than what he had paid for it. He read every contract himself, not because he didn't trust his people, because he had watched, over 15 years in manufacturing, what happened when someone assumed a document said what they had been told it said without verifying the assumption. He had watched it cost companies their margins, their clients, their ownership structures. He had decided early that it would not cost him his. His name was on every document that left his company. His name would be on every document that entered it too. The contract was 41 pages. A purchase agreement and simultaneous shareholder restructuring, drafted by a law firm Marcus recognized. They worked almost exclusively on leveraged buyout structures. He understood its terms completely before he reached page 8. The structure was this. Rachel held 22% of Apex Industrial, a gift Marcus had made when he incorporated, done out of love, without thinking carefully enough about what love required of documents. That 22% had been quietly transferred 2 months earlier into a holding entity called the Price Family Trust, a maneuver that was technically permitted under a provision in their shareholder agreement that allowed transfers to family trusts without mutual consent. Marcus had not known about the transfer because Rachel had used a corporate attorney who was not Diana, and the filing had gone into the state registry without triggering any notification to him. The Price Family Trust's 22% would be sold to Harmon Capital Partners, a private equity fund operated by a man named Derek Harmon. Simultaneously, A new share issuance, approved through a mechanism that required only majority shareholder approval, which Rachel's 22% combined with a provision in the agreement would provide, would dilute Marcus's 78% stake to 35%. The new shares, totaling 43% of the company, would be issued to Harmon Capital Partners in exchange for a $4.2 million investment, structured as a secured loan against the company's assets. The net result? Derek Harmon held 65% of Apex Industrial. Marcus held 35%. And the company was leveraged with $4.2 million in debt service on a business whose cash flow would be largely consumed by that service. Marcus's compensation for the dilution of his controlling interest was described in the agreement as a management retention payment of $1.1 million. He read that number. He set the page down. He looked at it for a moment. The company's annual EBITDA was $3.8 million. The $2 million debt at the terms specified would service at approximately $680,000 annually. A 35% holder who had received a $1.1 million payment and now held a minority stake in a leveraged company with a constrained growth ceiling. Derek Harmon would hold 65% of a company he had acquired for essentially nothing, secured against its own assets, positioned to either extract the cash flow or sell the whole operation within 3 years. The 67 employees did not appear in the document except as a line item in the operating cost schedule. Marcus read all 41 pages. He made a copy. He put the original back, face down, in the output tray. He went to the kitchen. He made coffee. He sat for a long time. He was thinking about 3 things. He was thinking about what he had built over 15 years. He was thinking about Cornelius Briggs, his floor supervisor of 9 years, who had worked the fabrication line for 26 years in total, and whose institutional knowledge was the kind that could not be replaced, and knew it. He was thinking about a sentence Rachel had said at a dinner 5 months ago. In a conversation that didn't call for the phrase, she had used the words, "when the company transitions." He had noticed it. He had set it down without deciding what it meant. He understood now what it had meant. He did not feel angry in the way he had expected to feel angry. He felt the specific, clear-eyed grief of a man who has been extended the precise consideration his evidence had always warranted, who had simply waited longer than he should have to act on what the evidence was telling him. He was done waiting. He called Diana that evening at 8:45. He said he needed her first thing in the morning. What Marcus had spent 8 years building in that marriage had not started with the wrong materials. Rachel had come into his life during the company's 2nd year. She was the one who had untangled the first major vendor dispute at a table in his conference room, with a calm and rigor that he had found more attractive than the untangling itself. She had worked in the company's finance department for 2 years before they were married. She had understood the business at a level most people never reached. She had left when their son was born, and that had been her decision and a correct one, and he had never thought of it as a loss, only as a transition. The distance had opened slowly, the way distances always open when they are happening in a structure that is still standing. Not in arguments, in the quality of her attention when he described a work problem, in the Saturday mornings that acquired separate schedules without announcement, in the dinner at a client event 14 months ago where she had introduced him to Derek Harmon as the founder, rather than as the person who ran the operation, a framing so small it barely registered. Except that Marcus registered things that were small. He had filed each observation away with the precise neutrality of a man who did not act on incomplete information. He had extended benefit of the doubt. He had told himself the distance was a phase, that marriages had phases, that the business was demanding, and so was being a parent, and that not everything that felt like something was actually something. He had been wrong about that last part, and he had known it. And he had continued extending benefit of the doubt past the point the evidence supported, which was his flaw, consistent and expensive. He had simply not known, until the Wednesday afternoon at the printer, how expensive. Diana Osei arrived at 7:15. She set her bag down and looked at the copy of the contract on the conference room table, with the expression of a person who has been doing this work for 20 years and is not easily surprised, and who is nonetheless looking at something that warrants a moment. She read it. She said, "Give me 48 hours." She came back in 36. She set the documents in the order she always set them, by date, by type, by what they established. The first document was Harmon Capital Partners' corporate history and prior transaction record. Derek Harmon had executed 3 similar deals in the previous 7 years, all involving insider assistance from a spouse or senior employee, all involving the same leverage dilution structure, all resulting in companies that were either significantly damaged or dissolved within 2 years of the transaction. 2 creditor actions had been filed against Harmon Capital in connection with 2 of the prior deals. Both had settled. The pattern was not visible if you looked at one transaction. It was not invisible if you looked at all 3. The second document was Rachel's financial positioning. 6 months ago, $180,000 had been moved from their joint savings account into a personal account in Rachel's name alone. The transfer had been coded as an investment account funding, which it technically was, except that the investment account's primary holding was a brokerage position in a fund adjacent to Harmon Capital Partners. Diana had also located the Price Family Trust registration, executed 12 months ago, through a corporate attorney in Raleigh, using the shareholder agreement's family trust provision in a way that was technically legal, but had been designed specifically to move the 22% position without triggering the notification provisions Marcus had assumed applied. The third document was the timeline. Derek Harmon and Rachel had met at an industry conference 14 months ago. The family trust had been formed 12 months ago. The acquisition structure had been drafted across the past 3 months. The dinner 5 months ago, where Rachel had said, "When the company transitions," had fallen precisely in the middle of the drafting period. 14 months. 3 months of contract drafting. A family trust formed a year ago to move the shares. A $180,000 positioning payment made 6 months ago. And a 41-page document left on a home printer on a Wednesday afternoon by someone who had printed it at home to keep it out of the company's document system. He looked at everything on the table the way he looked at a structural problem that required a system-level solution, not at any one element, but at all of them together, feeling the load paths, understanding what had been designed to fail and at what point. The scheme was constructed to complete before Marcus understood what was happening. The printer had been the only error. One document in the wrong place on a Wednesday afternoon, to a man who read everything he picked up. "She didn't know I came home early," he said. Diana said, "No." "She didn't know I read it." "No." "They think they still have the element of surprise." Diana looked at him. "They do. Until you move." He thought about 67 employees. He thought about Cornelius Briggs and the fabrication floor and the institutional knowledge that could not be replaced. He thought about what Derek Harmon had done to 3 prior companies and their workforces. "I'm not going to let the company get leveraged," he said. "I want to know what it's worth on a clean sale." Diana said, "I have a name." He didn't move fast. He did 2 things in the week that followed. He did not do them quickly, and he did not announce them. The first, he initiated a shareholder agreement amendment with Diana, using the existing governance procedure that eliminated the family trust transfer provision and replaced it with one requiring mutual consent for any equity transfer regardless of the receiving entity. The amendment was executed correctly, filed through the company's registered agent, and recorded in the state corporate registry. Rachel did not read corporate filings. She did not know the provision she had used to move the shares was now closed. The second, he removed Rachel's access to the company's financial systems in coordination with his CFO, on the documented grounds that she was neither an employee nor an active consultant, and that access was therefore outside policy. This was done with correct HR process and paper trail. It was not dramatic. It simply closed the information channel that had been feeding the acquisition structuring. He went to work. He answered his calls. He attended the quarterly review with his team and presented numbers that showed the company in excellent health. Which it was, because it had always been. Because he had built it to be. He came home in the evenings and ate dinner and asked about the week and said nothing about what he knew. He wore the same face he had always worn because his face was not a performance and had never needed to be. Harold Kim was the CEO of Meridian Manufacturing Group, a strategic acquirer in the precision component space who had been interested in Apex Industrial for 3 years. Diana had sent the introduction on a Thursday morning. Harold had come back by Friday afternoon. They had met the following Tuesday in a conference room in Charlotte for 4 hours. Harold's term sheet arrived on Thursday. $22 million. Clean structure. No leverage against the company's assets. Employee retention guaranteed in the acquisition agreement for a minimum of 24 months. Marcus read the term sheet twice. He made a note in the margin on page 3. He called Harold and said, "1 revision." Harold said, "Tell me." The revision took 11 minutes to negotiate. Marcus signed the revised term sheet that afternoon. He understood the sequencing. He had the counterposition. He had the corporate filing. He had Diana's complete documentation. He had not tipped his hand on any of it. What he needed now was for Rachel and Derek to open the door, to bring their contract to the table, believing they still had the element of surprise. He had been waiting 3 weeks for that moment. He did not have to wait much longer. Rachel told him on a Monday evening that she had been thinking about the company's future, and that she and a business contact had some thoughts she'd like him to hear. She said it in the careful, composed way of someone delivering a line they had rehearsed for the right moment. He said that sounded fine and suggested Thursday. Thursday. He liked it that way. Marcus arrived at the conference room, a neutral space at Diana's firm, which he had suggested and which Rachel had agreed to without understanding why he had suggested it 22 minutes early. He liked it that way. Diana was already there. Harold Kim arrived at 8:45 at Marcus's request and took a seat at the far end of the table. He had been briefed. He was precise, patient, and had no interest in the theatrical. He brought 1 folder. Marcus sat with his 2 folders and his coffee and the specific quiet of a man who had the full picture and had had it for 3 weeks and was now simply waiting for everyone else to arrive at the same room. Rachel came in at 9 with Derek Harmon. She stopped when she saw Harold Kim. Something moved across her face, a fraction of a second. Recognition of a name she knew from the industry. The beginning of a recalculation. Derek Harmon looked at Harold with the specific expression of a man encountering a variable he had not included in his model. Marcus indicated the chairs. They sat. He let them go first. Rachel framed it as a business conversation, an opportunity for the company's growth, a strategic partner with relevant experience. Derek opened his folder. He began to explain the acquisition structure. His voice had the practiced confidence of a man who had presented this specific structure 4 times and had gotten the terms he wanted in 3 of them. Marcus listened. He let Derek finish the framing. He let Rachel add her support. He waited until Derek set the contract on the table, their copy, the 41 pages, and slid it toward him. Then Marcus opened his first folder. He placed his copy of their contract on the table beside theirs. The copy he had made on a Wednesday afternoon 3 weeks ago. Same document. His handwriting in the margins on 11 pages, dated that day. Derek looked at it. He looked at Marcus. "I read it the day you printed it," Marcus said. He opened the second folder. Harold Kim's term sheet dated 9 days ago. He placed it on the table. $22 million. Clean structure. No leverage against the company's assets. Employee retention for 24 months, in writing. He looked at Derek. "You valued the company at $6.4 million after your debt service." A pause. "You should have brought better numbers." He looked at Rachel then. He said it quietly, only for her. "You moved the shares into the trust a year ago. The provision you used doesn't exist in the agreement anymore." He held her eyes for a moment. "I amended it." He stood. He shook Diana's hand, then Harold's. He buttoned his jacket. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned back once. "Cornelius Briggs has been on that floor for 26 years, he said. Not to Derek, to the room. Harold's agreement protects him by name. He walked out without looking back. It did not happen all at once. The acquisition closed 11 weeks later at $22 million. Harold Kim's retention provisions held. 64 of 67 employees remained with the company through the acquisition transition. Cornelius Briggs was named a lead process consultant on the integration team. Marcus had requested this in the final negotiation, and Harold had agreed without objection. Diana referred Derek Harmon's transaction pattern, the 3 prior deals, the 2 creditor actions, the documented insider assistance structure, to the state securities regulator's investment fraud unit. The referral included the Apex transaction materials and the full timeline. The investigation that followed was not Marcus's business to follow closely, but its existence was a matter of record. The divorce proceeded in parallel. Rachel's $180,000 transfer was documented and addressed as dissipated marital assets. The Price Family Trust had held the 22% stake at the time of the shareholder agreement amendment. But the amended provision invalidated the pending sale to Harmon Capital. The amendment had been executed before the purchase agreement was formally presented, which was the sequence Marcus had built around. The 22% was returned to the marital estate in the dissolution. Its portion of the acquisition proceeds, calculated against the $22 million valuation, was divided according to the settlement. She was not left with nothing. She was left with what the honest math of an honest dissolution produced, which was considerably less than what the 41-page contract had been designed to give her, and which she had to accept because the alternative was a contested proceeding in which every document Diana had assembled would enter the public record. Derek Harmon's fund dissolved within a year. The investigation's findings were not made public in detail, but their consequences were. Marcus had taken the first 3 months after the acquisition closed and done almost nothing. He had visited his parents in High Point. He had taken his son to every site his son wanted to see, which included a rail yard, a bridge construction project, and, for reasons that were not entirely clear to Marcus, a salt flat. He had slept 8 hours. He had read books in the evenings and not thought about contracts. In the 4th month, he had started something new. A smaller operation, precision components for aerospace applications, a space he had been watching for years. 6 employees to start. His own money, no leverage, no outside investors. The shareholder agreement written by Diana, carefully with provisions that required mutual consent for everything that mattered. He had read it himself before he signed it. He had made 2 margin notes. He had signed it. On a Tuesday morning in March, Marcus Price stood on the floor of the new facility, a leased space in an industrial park outside Charlotte. Concrete floors, a smell of cutting fluid and metal, and the specific atmosphere of a room that was becoming what it was going to be. He was reviewing a piece of equipment with a machinist he had hired the previous week, a young man named Terrell, who had come from a larger shop and had the instincts of someone who understood the work before he could fully articulate why. Terrell was explaining something about the tolerances on a specific job. Marcus listened. He asked one question. Terrell answered it well. Marcus said, "Run it." Terrell ran it. Marcus watched the machine run. He watched the part emerge. He picked it up and examined it in the light, turned it over, checked the finish with his thumb, checked the dimension against the spec sheet in his hand. He set it down. He picked up his pencil. He made one mark on the spec sheet. He said, "That's the one." He went back to work. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.